You guys ever wonder what it would be like to date a centaur? Did you guys ever think that it would actually work? Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I tried to pin something on this one. I tried to find something that made the centaur just not dateable, because that was kind of the shtick that I was going for. But I was surprised to find that they're actually genuinely good? Even when I'm trying to find something bad about the female centaur, because there are some bad things about the male centaur, I'll get into those later. The female centaur is just clean. Hi, if you're new to the channel, welcome. It's kind of like this most of the time. Basically what I do for this series is I give you the origin of the demi-human / monster girl in question. I then summarize the powers that they may have, and then compare them to their fictional counterpart that usually comes from an anime. And then I just give you my input about how they would exist with us, coexist with us in real life. And then I give you my final thoughts. Just what I personally think of them. Because I can. However, the centaur, at least the female centaur, doesn't have much that you can pin on it, hence the title. The male centaurs are a little more problematic, and there actually is more of a reason to not want to date them. I will get into that just as I go down the origin stories. I also like to say up front that I am not a solid researcher. I hear thunder outside. I am not a solid researcher. I am just a guy who is reacting to various mythos that he finds on the internet because he thinks that they are cool. And then relating them to anime because he is also a nerd. I want to breeze through the origin stories as fast as possible so that way we can start talking about the female centaurs, but it also is integral to learn about the origin that just so happens to have male centaurs in it. Because without that, we aren't able to figure out what powers a centaur has. Because as you are going to find, they aren't so much powers, so much as life skills, and maybe heightened human senses. That, and I'm pretty sure 90% of my audience want to know if it's possible to fornicate with a centaur, which, stay tuned. I was able to find 4 theories that regard the origin story of a centaur. The final 2 might be able to be meshed together. I'm going to say it as if they were meshed together and then explain what the differences were, but we'll get there when we get there. Our story begins in ancient Greece, where there is a territory in Greece called Thessaly. The importance of Thessaly is that for generations it's the place where the centaur is said to have come from, and it's also, according to my notes, reputed to be the place where the Greeks figured out how to ride a horse. Origin story number 1 suggests that that statement might have more than one meaning, and my faith in humanity is lowered, and we are moving on. The second origin story is my personal favorite, and that follows the story of a chronicler, scholar, whatever, just a man who researches, who was invited to Thessaly after he was given the invitation to come down, because he heard that Thessalonians invented this new thing that you could do with a horse, where you treat him nicely, you pet him on the nose, you give him food, and they allow you to sit on them. Now, where you and I would perceive that as horseback riding, just the simple domestication of a horse, the Greeks, after having just invented it, didn't quite know what they were looking at. The Thessalonians knew what they were looking at, but the scholar most certainly did not. So when he was looking at this, probably with his mouth gaping wide open like the genie from Aladdin, he's just in awe going, "Oh my god, there's men on horses." So he writes that down and then takes his fanfic back to wherever he came from, to which he spreads it by word of mouth, and everybody around him, not knowing what it means to ride on the back of a horse, think, "Holy crap, Thessaly's got horse people!" And there's no way to fact check this unless you actually go to Thessaly yourself, which would have been just a journey out of your way. So for a long time, people would just believe the fanfic that Thessaly just had people that were half horse, half man. And to me, that's just super funny, because it just represents how a game of telephone could really misconstrue information to such a degree that people believe in a fanfic more so than the more simple explanation of, that's just a dude sitting on a horse. It's not half man, half horse. It's just a person. That is potentially how we got our hands on the centaur, and why in the modern day we have people that want to form relationships with this thing. And I also just want to put this idea into your heads because I thought it was pretty funny. But Imagine being the first person to actually figure out how to ride one of these things. And you're just like, hey guys, check this out. And you pull up in the BC equivalent of like a Rolls Royce. And then people would just look at you with wide eyes and mouths wide open as they're just, oh my gods, he's sitting on it. And then people write fanfic of you that people then take as fact. Like, this man that I saw, he was half horse, half man, and he was majestic and beautiful. Again, not mythical, but I really hope that that is how we got the centaur, because that would just be hilarious. Theory number 3 is a lot more story-driven and actually has a plot to it that leads into theory 4. This theory suggests that the origin story of the centaur comes from that of a human and a cloud nymph, and meddling from our old friend Zeus. The human in question was a man named Ixion. Ixion was the king of Thessaly, just as Thessaly was starting out, but as he began to show signs of being a violent and brutal and just a really terrible ruler overall, the people did not like him anymore. So he then ended up being an outcast within his own kingdom, to which Zeus sees this man and, on a really rare occasion, takes mercy on him. He pats him on the back and says, hey man, I know life is not very good for you right now, so why don't I invite you over to Mount Olympus, we can share a couple of drinks, have a nice feast, we could even talk with some of the gods, because the people must have done you dirty. I wasn't there, I don't know what the conversation was. But Ixion takes the invitation and goes up to Mount Olympus, where you think that he would be gratuitous to Zeus for giving him this rare occasion to dine with the gods. So, Ixion, upon attending the dinner, starts to feel feelings for Zeus's wife, Hera, which, recipe for disaster right there. Zeus catches wind of this, but doesn't punish Ixion right away. He wants to give him a test to see if this guy is actually going to do it. So he convinces a cloud nymph by the name of Nephile? I'm probably mispronouncing the name. Zeus convinces Nephile to take on the form of Hera, using clouds, and see what Ixion does. She agrees, and so the two of them meet up, and just almost immediately they start hooking up right there. Zeus, after having just caught this man in 4K, decides to punish Ixion separately. He puts him on a burning wheel for all of eternity, but the children that he had conceived with the nymph, because I guess they managed to get that far, he ended up cursing that as well. That child ends up becoming Centaurus, who is unfortunately born as half man, half horse, with a very animalistic and brutal instinct that the people do not like, much as they did not like his father for similar brutal and violent instincts. His father now burning in Tartarus, his mother just nowhere to be found, and his people having just thrown him out of his own kingdom. The poor boy's in exile, so he just roams the countryside until he encounters some female horses, some Magnesian mares, and proceeds to fornicate with them. And to my knowledge, that is the third origin story of how the centaur race came to be, all brought about by Centaurus mating with mares and creating an entire species from there, all of which coming from Ixion's second son. I'll just give you a brief overview of what the fourth origin story suggests, because I really want to mesh the fourth one with the third one. It just makes so much more sense. So, in this one, Centaurus has a brother named Lapithus, where Lapithus had generations before him that were people that became Thessaly, eventually. And Centaurus was just born as half man, half horse, and he created the centaur race from there, creating two different kinds of people, born from the god Apollo, which is the father of the two children, and the mother, Stylibe, which is a goddess who I never heard of until making this video. But it just... I hate it because you could just easily take out the gods. You can just remove Apollo and Stylibe and just say that Ixion had two children. And that is the story that I'm going to tell you, because I think that it works better that way. And yes, I know, I shouldn't be making my own mythos, but this is my channel, I do what I want, and I really want this to be the case. There is no record saying that Ixion had two children, but we're going to pretend that he did. So, Centaurus would be Ixion's second, and I'll say illegitimate son, because it was created by him having sex with a cloud nymph, and then Zeus punishing the child, like the would-be child, by turning them into half man, half horse. The first son, named Lapithis, was a human, and was a successful human. Not like his father, he was actually a good ruler that built up the territory of Thessaly and created a whole bloodline of just humans that live within it. And then Centaurus, you have on the other side, having created an entire generation of centaurs. So you have generations created by both brothers, now living in the same territory. It is the human side of Thessaly that sees the male centaur race as being very violent and powerless to their instinctual behavior, as if they were just a passenger. The human was a passenger in this animalistic body that couldn't help but steal, pillage, and create violence, because that's what the animal inside them wants them to do, and they are helpless to stop it. And in no story is this more evident than in the story of Hippodamia's wedding, which depicts centaurs and humans trying to come together in an act of peace, only for it to fail. Two important people in Thessaly, whose names that I am forgetting, are having a wedding, and everybody's invited. Everybody wants to celebrate it. In an act of good faith, the husband wants to try to invite centaurs to the wedding to see if we can make coexistence possible, to see if it's possible to play nice, that centaurs can drop their animalistic behavior just for a little while, so that way we can all celebrate this happy occasion in peace. The wedding then takes place, and things seem to be going well. That is until alcohol gets served. One thing that I will go over later is that centaurs cannot hold their alcohol. This is just a fact that exists within the mythos. So once they get a taste of it, any sense that the centaur had, any human that was in them that was still in control at that moment, was gone. The centaurs at the wedding slowly started to become more and more drunk, until the wife came out to make a speech, to which one of the centaurs gets rowdy and runs after the wife. He tries to grab her and abduct her, along with other centaurs that see this and get the same idea to grab nearby women and run off with them. They also start throwing tables and food and trashing the whole place, to which peace at this point is no longer an option. It's at this point that the human men at the wedding are trying to stop the centaurs from abducting and forcing themselves on their women, to which the centaurs take it as an invitation to violence and start fatally wounding the men at the wedding. And the remaining humans at the wedding take up arms in the forms of whatever they could find. Weapons they might have brought with them, stones they seen lying on the ground, pieces of tables, and just everything that they could find, to try to fight back against the centaurs in this grand battle that would end up with the humans being on top and the centaurs being forced out of Thessaly. And with that, the fight that came from the generations of these two brothers from one king ended with the humans winning and the centaurs being hunted to near extinction and forced underground. This would be immortalized as the Battle of Centaurimachie, which kind of weird how it started out with a wedding and then became a full-front war, but that's how the mythos is described. The story of the Centaurimachie was something that the ancient Greeks used as a means to fear barbarians and get people to be afraid of people with animalistic urges and toxic masculine behavior, because these people got drunk, tried to steal women in a wedding, and it ended up being a all-out war. Do not try to do what they did, and that's the lesson that they try to taught. As well as the lesson of beware of the barbarians outside of our borders who are not as civilized as us. They will do the same thing as these centaurs, so try to keep on your toes. It's safer just to stay where you are. So, needless to say, the centaur got a bit of a bad rap when it came to that story, but it's not to say that every centaur was bad, because you still had a lot of good centaur players. For one, you have the centaur Chiron, who ended up being a mentor figure for Hercules and Achilles, if I remember correctly. And he was also an accomplished astronomer and medical practitioner that taught the heroes that he mentored everything that he knew. And Chiron seemed to be a pretty good guy up until his end, when he unfortunately took a poison arrow, I think during the battle at Centaurimachie, where he, unfortunately being immortal, couldn't die from it, so he was just suffering from pain, to which Zeus had mercy on him and said, all right, Chiron, I will give you the ability to die, because that is just a really sad way for you to live your existence, constantly being poisoned to death. And so, Chiron got his wish granted. But from what I can gather, the Centaur just had a mixed relationship with Greece, because I don't really know the backstory, but it seems like people either loved them or they hated them. I just know that in this story in particular, people were made to fear the barbarian nature that the Centaur represented. After all of that, now we get to the big question. What were the women Centaur like? We don't know a lot about the woman Centaur. The records that we do have are few and far between, and a lot of them also come from artwork that people had described in later generations after the Centaur was supposed to exist. But from what we have, we can gather that the female Centaur race, also known as the Centauridae, were very well in control, or at least were more in control than their male primal counterpart that would fall victim to themselves and their animalistic behavior. The women were apparently in very good control of it and did not fall for their animalistic urges, at least until mating season, where they lived pretty peacefully. That said, the Centauridae still have attributes from their male counterparts, like not being able to take alcohol, having strong athleticism, and a good sense of smell, because in some stories the Centaur are able to detect the smell of alcohol from a long distance away. These are some pretty good attributes, and the big reason why I couldn't pin anything on the Centaur woman, because what am I going to tell you? She's bad because she can't drink? The Centaur woman is depicted in a couple of arts, including that of mosaics and paintings, as well as literature that describes them as being just the most beautiful women in the ancient world because of their athletic prowess, that being running around giving them a slim figure, and their herbivore diets. Now, Centaur males ate meat, and I'm sure that a good majority of the female centaurs also ate meat, but it seems like they were more so fixated on vegetables, which, props to them, I guess. It's kind of like how ancient Sparta was reputed to have the most beautiful women in the ancient world because their women went through mandatory exercises and, as a result, had really slim figures. That's not to say that their habits were the only thing that made the female centaur desirable, because they also seem to have a large sense of loyalty to them. To that point about loyalty, one of the most famous stories in all of centaur lore is that of a Centauridae named Hylinome, who comes to comfort her dying husband Kilaros after he was fatally wounded in the Battle of Centaurimaki. As he's laying there dying, Hylinome grabs her husband and cradles him in her arms as he draws his last breath, which moves Hylinome to a state of great sadness, and as a means to try to bind her soul with his, she impales herself on her husband's spear and follows him into the afterlife. If that is not ride or die, I don't know what is. That is just loyalty at its finest. And again, another W for the Centaur. Relationships between the centaurs and the ancient Greeks may be hit or miss, but it's stories like that of Hylinome and her loyalty, and that of Chiron and his ability to suppress his urges and accomplish way more than any other human of his time. Those stories speak more volumes to me personally than that of any story of their brutality. Even going into the modern day, you see stories like that of Fantasia in the 1940s, where they had that animation about the centaurs and how beautiful they were. Or in Narnia, where you see the depiction of a centaur being a noble hero. Those seem to be our perception of the centaur today that carried on from the ancient world. We don't really remember the centaur for its brutality, but today we're remembering it more as it's something to be celebrated, which is probably why we also have one as a zodiac, of which I am one of the Sagittarius myself. Then you look at the modern anime landscape, like in Monster Musume, you have Centauria Shianus, who's just super loyal to the main character and just a really sweet girl overall. And then you have A Centaur's Life, which I know nothing about, but she doesn't look primal to me. If anything, we're the more primal ones, because now we want to try to forge relationships with centaur women, where back in the day, centaurs wanted to forge relationships with our women, which, like, how the hell? I guess what I'm trying to say is the story of the female centaur, the Centauridae, who is more of an image of grace and beauty and refinement, seems to carry on to the modern landscape, whereas the more brutal centaur is pushed to the side, which, now that I'm covering the powers, seems like a power within itself that they're able to change their mythos to look like more of a thing that is worth celebrating. So what are those powers? Well, if I were to sum it up, I'd say that the centaur comes with enhanced beauty, they have a stronger sense of smell, they can't handle their wine, and they are loyal to their partners. That last one seems like more of a life choice, but that is a superpower, and you cannot convince me. Again, I reiterate, this is why I couldn't find anything bad about the centaur. There is really nothing that you can pin on it that is just definitively terrible. You can pin stuff on the men, but when it comes to the women centaur, because I know that's what we're most interested in, there's nothing bad you can say. In fact, there's another power that they have in the Monster Musume universe, which I really want to make canon because that would just be that would just be funny, and it just removes your right to say no to centaurs entirely. According to the Monster Musume Encyclopedia, the centaur are a demi-human race with the upper body of a human attached to the lower body of a horse and equine ears. Herbivores, centaurs usually are normally found in grasslands and savannas, and are a race of nomads who became brave warriors in times of conflict. For centuries, centaurs were a violent, militaristic race that lived around the art of combat, while centaur males developed into being more muscular, vulgar, violent beasts who only saw raw strength as valuable. Centaur females favored technique and became more refined and more prideful warriors. It's stuff like this that makes me think, wow, the author of Monster Musume really did their research, because it's basically just spot on. Now, about that superpower that I wish to be canon in the mythos of the centaur that we know, not the anime version, the one that we know. While the variance of genitalia can presumably make cross-racial intercourse difficult, the female parts of a centaur woman work very much the same way as that of a human woman. To accommodate for a human counterpart, the equine's cervical area can optionally extend itself back at further lengths than a humanoid's female part to accommodate for the size of an equine penis. So when it comes to the battle between horses and men, as far as size goes, we're going to lose every time, and that's doubly worse for me because Filipinas. But with this, the centaur apparently has the power to shape their female part to accommodate for whatever size their partner has, which this is why I couldn't make a video saying you wouldn't want to date the centaur. Like, we've lost our right to say no. Add to that the loyalty, the enhanced beauty, the great sense of smell and taste buds. Like, what's the problem? There is none. There just is none. Hi, it's me again, but wearing a different shirt. While working in post, I did recall one negative in regards to the centaur, and that is the subject of cuddling. So, when you're with a lamia, they could still lie on their back, right? So you could still cuddle with them all you like, and it would actually be pretty comfortable given their tail. For the Jirogamo, possible. I mean, I've seen a couple of pictures of Rhaenyra on her back, so it's still fine. But with the centaur, the lower half being what it is, your best chance would probably be to get one of those Japanese beds that are on the floor and are not held up by bedposts or footboards or anything, or being on a field, or falling asleep in the hay, whatever your preference. But I don't think that cuddling a centaur would be all that comfortable, or even possible for that matter. Those are my 2 cents. I don't think that cuddling would be good. I'm going on a tangent. I'm going to make that a part of my personal thoughts because this video is long as it is. But anyway, how do I think that we would manage coexistence with a centaur? I think that overall, the public would love them. Like, I think that they would be okay living in our society, but it would be a pain in the ass to try to integrate them. In my notes, I have down, paying to make places centaur accessible would be a hassle that politicians just don't want to deal with. And if the American public transit system is any indication, where we've had many years to change that and make it better, I don't think that any leader is going to move on accommodating the horse girl just because she looks pretty. Then again, a centaur already is public transit. God, that sounds so bad. Yeah, I ride my wife to work. What do you want? But given how widely accepted horses are and how we have horse farms, I don't think that they're going to be discriminated against, and I think that they're going to receive a lot of love, especially from the anime community, because... obviously. I mostly just see the accommodations of, like, trying to make things centaur accessible being the biggest problem, because if you're going to go on a date with your centaur girlfriend to, like, the movies, you can't do that because theater seats aren't going to work, and you can't do lots of stuff. Your options are limited to that of just kind of walking around outside, which I have no doubt, especially reading the comment section of my videos, that you guys are able to make that work. But the world entire is just another thing that I can't really account for. It's just my best speculation. It's my best guess. I also have down that Panera Bread and Salad Works would have stocks that go through the roof, which, that's pretty cool. So after all of that, what do I think of the Centaur? It's still not my preferred. I get everything about why people like centaurs, especially now that I know that they are just, like, the S-tier monster girl. But me, personally, I just don't really feel it for the centaur. That's not to say that I don't like them. I still think that they're cute, I still think that some of them are hot, and I still really like Sarah. But I also know that I am not the best person for a centaur, and they shouldn't waste their loyalty on me. I might not be worthy enough for a centaur now, given the stats that I know. Plus, I know the first thing that I'd do if I got a centaur wife.
Honey, I just came up with the perfect name for our child. Let's name her Mayo.
But why would we name our child Mayo? Because mayonnaise. Yeah, probably for the best I don't have a centaur wife. It's just good for the both of us. And that just about does it for the centaur. I mean, the men might still be jerks, so if you wouldn't want to date a centaur, I would stay away from the centaur men. But the women? S-tier monster girl, like S-tier demi-human. You should definitely invest in one of those if you haven't already. But all things considered, I'd think that they're really cool, and given that they've lasted up into our modern day despite their troubled past, I can see why people would like to date the centaur and would like to have a centaur girlfriend. My apologies for this video being as long as it is, but the centaur was just such a rabbit hole when I dove into it. I just had to share everything that I found, from origin stories to powers to the Monster Musume stuff to personal thoughts. It becomes a whole thing. If you're still here after doing all my rambling, you're super cool for doing that. If you're one of the ones that helped me surpass my 2,600 subscriber count, you're also super cool, but you're also super mean, because I expected to have this video out before I hit that marker, but I grew too fast. You guys are just... you continue to amaze me with stuff like this, because I didn't think that this was content that people would have wanted to see. But lo and behold, you prove me wrong every time. I tell you that you don't want to date the Lamia, you prove me wrong. I tell you you don't want to date the Jirogamo, you prove me wrong. I tell you you might be okay dating the Centaur. We'll see where that goes. I'm curious to see how that actually does, because maybe people might pull the opposite and say, hey, you know what? Maybe the Centaur's overrated. Maybe it's not for me anymore. But it's just interesting to see how people react to these sorts of things. And also just to see people supporting me, which, thank you again for continuously doing that. I am turning this into a series, and if you will stick with me for the entirety of the Monster Girl series and whatever else I come up with, that would be super cool. I'll say it again, the Centaur was a really interesting one to go into. It's a really neat mythos, especially because it turned out being sweeter than I expected. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I tend to be a little more squeamish when it comes to the more violent cases and like the baby eaters and the man-eating and the bloodsuckers. So it's just nice to have the Centaur come in here and just challenge all of that with a actual really nice demi-human monster girl. So more of those recommendations, please. Or don't. Give me one of the more sporadic ones or one of the more weird ones that you know of, because those are pretty cool too. But anyway, that's all I got for you. Sayonara, suckers.